The two scriptures I'd like to share are those, again, from Micah, the 6th chapter, verses 6 through 8. And then this morning, I'd like to share a scripture from Paul's letter to the church at Ephesus, Ephesians 4:31-32. With what shall I come before the Lord and bow down before the exalted God? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with 10,000 rivers of oil? Shall I offer my firstborn for my transgressions, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? He has showed you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. Paul says to the church at Ephesus, get rid of all bitterness, rage, and anger, brawling and slander, among the every forms of malice. Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgive each other, just as Christ, God, forgave you. Now, I find it most interesting that in all three of the requirements that God shares with Micah, that the people who are following and faithful in their worship of God should be engaged in. And what Micah says, God tells us, is that we need to do something really much more simple, yet much more complex. Something much easier, but almost always much more difficult. And the other thing that Micah reports that God has suggested as ways that we might truly please God is that none of them contain a dollar sign. None of them require us to expend our resources other than our intellect and our will and our spirit and our actions. Now, very interestingly, the contrast is fascinating because what is being asked of us is very different than what the others thought indeed they should be doing. For instance, they were being asked to give resources that were part of their possessions, part of their, what we might think today as their net worth. They were being asked, they thought, to give all kinds of things that they owned, including that which had come from their very body. Now, keep in mind that in the Old Testament, it was believed that men produced life, that men gave to the new life from themselves, and that women were, unfortunately, in our thinking today, thought to be merely vessels of that life that they had been given. And so it was said, well, do I need to give that which came from my body? My body, my very first son. No. It reminds us of the story of Abraham, who was asked to give his son, actually his only son at the moment, as a sacrifice to demonstrate his great faith in God. And Micah is saying, God says, no, none of that is needed. You don't have to bring burnt offerings. You don't have to bring a calf that is only a year old. And as a farmer, I know that calves who are a year old are perhaps the most, in terms of the meat they provide, the most tender. And that's why you love your veal. It is the most precious of the young calves. And the calves that were offered were always and most often the male calf, thought to be the most rich and precious of all the meats. No, you don't have to give that. You don't have to give all of the other things that might be exceptionally worthy and valuable. Thousands and thousands of rivers of oil? No, none of that. What you're asked to give is that you live justly. Now, I said last Sunday that requires us to think about it. It requires us to consider what it is that we think about other people and other relationships that we have. And when we think about those relationships, how might we change our thinking, our attitudes, our biases? How might we change the way we respond based on the way we think? And to then put it into practice, which Micah says is what living justly is all about. Seek justice means to live justly. Now, in the various translations, kindness is oftentimes, as I read this morning, translated into mercy. Other translations of the writing of Micah translate the word into kindness. Now, for some reason, kindness is easier for us to wrap our mind around because it doesn't require quite as much of us as offering mercy. Except that the truth of the matter is God is identifying the grace that is offered to each of us as an act of kindness / mercy. Kindness / mercy. And what Micah is saying God is asking of us is that we practice kindness. Now, kindness also begins with one's thinking, and one's thinking about how might I be kind? How might I demonstrate kindness that it might be understood and seen by others? There's a fascinating story that I read recently on the internet. It had to do with a church in Illinois, two congregations within the Catholic parish. The young people and others decided that they were going to see if they could generate 1,000 acts of kindness between August and the end of the year. And these were two relatively small parishes, but the goal was to ask people to commit themselves to record the kindness that they had offered. A kindness which was calling a friend and saying, I miss you, I value your friendship so much. Calling your grandchildren and say, how are you doing? I love you so much. I'm glad you're part of my family. I'm so pleased with how you're doing swimming or in your preparation for your degree. Any number of kindnesses that include sometimes the simplest kindness when your grocery basket is so full of groceries and somebody comes up behind you and they only have 2 items and you say, why don't you go first? Acts of kindness. Kindness. Well, you'd think it would be easy for those congregational members to respond, but some of them were embarrassed about doing it, and some of them were uncomfortable in reporting what they had done, and some of them, of course, had some difficulty with the technology because they were supposed to report it to the church mutual webpage and report what they had done, who they had done it to and for, and what was the response? Well, delightfully, those experiments in kindness, which occurred last August through the end of last year, in the worst time of pandemic that we have experienced, the upsurging of people becoming infected, the greater danger. And in spite of that, they found unique and special ways to demonstrate kindness. And they celebrated. They were so excited. They had produced 1,038 acts of kindness during that period of time. Children, teenagers, young adults, men, women of all ages found ways to demonstrate kindness. Now, the goal of that parish and those two congregations was to continue to do it. You see, it's kind of like, well, I'm going to exercise today and I'm going to exercise tomorrow, but Thursday I'm not going to exercise and I'm going to go on a diet. And yes, I'm going to cut back on sugars. I'm going to cut back on breads and I'm going to only eat those things which are good for me, like salads. And then we stop. Kindness, which is being encouraged by God as a way of demonstrating your praise of God, must continue forever. It must be forever. Now, by the way, we are not the only ones who believe through our Jewish background and our Christian faith that kindness is of great value as we live our lives. You know, Bob Kerrey one time said as a senator, he said, unexpected kindness is the most powerful, least costly, and most underrated agent of human change. And I like the words that have come to us from a host of other sources, including Proverbs, which says to us, from a wise mind comes wise speech. The words of the wise are persuasive. Kind words are like honey, sweet to the soul and healthy for the body. Or back again into the New Testament, 1 Corinthians says, love is patient and kind. Well, the Quran tells us through Muhammad, indeed, believers in your love, mercy, and kindness to one another is like a body. If any part of it is ill, the whole body shares its sleeplessness and its fever. Well, the Buddhists say, for instance, Buddha is quoted as saying, if you have a choice between being kind and being right, choose being kind, and you will always be right. And there is a wise African poet that says, Maya Angelou, my wish for you is that you continue to be who and how you are. I admonish you that there is a mean world, be kind to it with your acts of kindness. The invitation comes to us to examine how we think. Examine how we convert our thinking into responses, and how we then continue to understand how we convert our responses into kindness. Now, I must say, it's not always easy. In a moment, we respond quickly and sometimes say things that are unkind and insensitive. I'm sorry, doesn't change it, but indeed it needs to come from each of us. I'm sorry for what I said. I'm sorry for what I did. I'm sorry for my insensitivity. I really want to be kind to you. Surprisingly, those who are in the field of law have as one of the recommended standards of professional behavior that they give 50 hours of time pro bono to those who have need. I had a conversation a number of years ago with a gentleman who has a major law firm in the central area of Wisconsin. And I said to him, do you expect your attorneys to do that? And he said, oh, yes, I do. I said, 50 hours of pro bono services. Well, yeah, it's optional. And what they often do is give the equivalency to charity. Now, while the equivalency to charity is worthwhile and needed indeed, the emphasis was if you give pro bono to someone who is poor, if you give pro bono to somebody who is struggling because they have been abused, if you give pro bono to someone who has been accused wrongly of something, you will understand their struggle. You'll have insight into their pain. One of the proverbs that I read recently was, if you hold back your kindness to someone, you also will not experience their happiness and joy. The folks in that community in northern Illinois reported that many people who said, "Why are you doing this?" They said, "Because Jesus taught me to do this. Jesus taught me to be kind." Well, how come you're doing that? Because it is part of who I am, as part of my parish. And then they gave the name of their church. What a powerful witness. Now, not everyone says to you, "Why are you doing this?" But more often than not, they will be able to know that someone who offered them a gentle comment, an opportunity perhaps to go in first to check out, an opportunity to have someone hold the door open for him, that there is someone out there who cares. And if they ask why, they'll know because they follow Jesus. What does the Lord require of you? To live justly and to love kindness and mercy. Will you pray with me, please, the prayer that you find in your bulletin? And the prayer also contains a proverb which comes from Africa. Pray with me. Most gracious God, you have shown kindness and mercy in and through Jesus. Your promise has been fulfilled. As we leave this time of worship, may our thoughts, words, and actions reveal our kindness and mercy toward others. An African proverb reminds us that kindness is a language that the blind can see and the deaf can hear. Amen. God bless you.